So I've been at Marquette for 4 years, but I've been researching for 18 years in my respective field. So I actually got started as an undergraduate studying circadian rhythms in my lab at University of Virginia. And that turned into desiring to do more research to get a PhD, where I continued to look at circadian rhythms, this time adding on sleep. And after that, I did my postdoctoral studies at the University of Michigan, where I was really interested in how the brain controls our body weight regulation. So in other words, why do we weigh what we weigh? How does our brain contribute or control obesity? I think I was just totally fascinated by that. And then after that, I started at my own lab bringing these two questions together. So how do circadian rhythms and obesity interact? What can circadian biology tell us about obesity that's new and informative to help us overcome this large problem that we're having in society? And then what can our knowledge about obesity and body weight regulation tell us and give us some new understandings about circadian rhythms? So that's what my laboratory does at Marquette. And it's a really great experience here at Marquette. I get to interact with a lot of students um, and they're fantastic. Undergraduates, graduate students are just great. And yeah, that's my story. So I think that one of the real highlights of my research is it uses lots of cross-disciplinary approaches. So we really like to merge these fields of circadian biology and metabolism, and most recently, also how the brain controls breathing to ask fundamentally creative, innovative questions that are going to help to help health of individuals. Um, so our research most recently is looking at how circadian rhythms can teach us something about how we breathe. Circadian rhythms in general, I'll just backtrack and say when I first heard about circadian rhythms as an undergraduate, I thought it was like some horoscope thing. Like I didn't think it was like a real biology thing. But the circadian rhythms are controlled by a collection of neurons in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nuclei. And this gives your body this internal clock, so this internal pacemaker. So thanks to the environmental light-dark cycle, this clock can continue to tick on all the time and synchronize to what's happening on the outside. So it uses those light cues to inform your body that it's morning, and it organizes a variety of your body rhythms, from like sleep-wake patterns to feeding fasting rhythms, and even like fluctuations in your hormones. It can time all of those so everything is happening at an optimal time, which really, when organized, can lead to peak fitness and health, but when disorganized, can really be associated with disease states. So our research is interested in how the disruption of these rhythms are related to obesity, and also how obesity and circadian rhythms may interact to influence sleep apnea. So I will briefly define sleep apnea, but in reality, it's almost like 1 in 5 US Americans has sleep apnea. So most likely anyone listening to this already knows what sleep apnea is. So sleep apnea is a very common sleep disorder where an individual will actually experience periods of breathing cessation. So they'll either totally stop breathing, or they'll have severely reduced breathing during sleep. And when they stop breathing, their oxygen levels drop. And this signals the brain like red alert, red alert, red alert, start breathing. And so the person will have a little micro arousal. They'll like wake up a bit and then start breathing again. So if you happen to be sleeping next to an individual in sleep apnea, with sleep apnea, you may hear some snoring followed by a stopping and snoring, and a long breath of wait, a long pause, followed by a gasp. Okay, so this sort of pattern of breathing, we are starting to see in our research that how circadian biology influences how the brain controls breathing can lead to an exacerbation of a sleep apnea-like state. And there's also really interesting interaction with obesity as well as sex. So whether you're male or female can also impact how you're breathing under these states. So one of the things that really motivates me is I love seeing how all these different pieces fit together. So I'm actually not a big fan of crossword puzzles, but I feel like this is my brain's equivalent. I like to see how the fields of circadian biology fit together with things like respiratory physiology. I like to compare the similarities and differences and figure out how our thorough understanding of one field can inform us in new inventive ways on another. And I just think that that's just so, it's just so rewarding. It's just so innately rewarding to have those moments of those light bulb moments of how everything fits together. I just think it's really amazing and really satisfying. Um, that being said, I haven't always had this approach to science. I initially had to get interested in it by another means. So I initially started researching as an undergrad, as I alluded to in one of my previous questions. And I was interested in a research experience as an undergrad, and I remember going to a number of different neuroscience labs at the University of Virginia to talk to the PIs and professors about what kind of science they were doing. And I talked to about 3 different professors, and every professor I talked to, I didn't understand anything they told me, really. Like, okay, 5%. I understood 5% of what they said, and every other word went right over my head. I had really no idea. Um, and I think that also speaks, by the way, to how quickly academics, including myself now, speak to other people as if they're their peers. You know, how really it is a talent to talk to individuals that are not as educated in what you've been researching for the past 20 years, like fair. Anyway, long story, I met this with this one individual. His name was Michael Menaker, who was a circadian biologist, and he told me about some of the projects that he was working on. And one of the projects he told me was something to the effect of, we're working on this one project where we're interested in how genes are either upregulated or downregulated, depending on if it's the day or night in the brain. And I was like, oh, okay, like I get this. Like you're looking at how gene expression changes relative to the time of day, and that you're collecting these tissues either during the day or during the night. I was like, okay, I got this. And I was so interested in this topic. And I learned, being a very like ambitious undergraduate, that if you wanted to appear interested in something, you should ask a question. So like I scrambled to ask Dr. Menaker a question, and the only question I can think of was embarrassingly, if you're collecting the tissues at night, how do you see? How do you see what you're doing? Which is so embarrassing. I look back, I'm like, what was I doing? Well, I was trying to show that I was engaged. But it was turned out to be like the best question that I could have ever asked, because his answer was, oh, that's easy. We use night vision goggles. And I said, I want to do that project. That sounds amazing. I want to use night vision goggles. So I signed up to volunteer in that lab. I did get to learn how to use night vision goggles. I like to pretend I was a science spy. So I often joke that I got into research for the technology, which, by the way, is an absolutely legitimate reason to love science, is we get to play with really cool toys and really cool equipment. But what really motivates me now is really no longer the cool toys and equipment, although that is still really cool. It's what we can do with that really cool equipment and what it can tell us about science, health, and our life. So right now, as our lab moves forward with our research, we've got 2 or 3 topics that are really, really interesting. And the first one that I'm going to tell you about very briefly is a very ambitious project. So our lab has collected some data that suggests that light, so environmental light, like you might be exposed to from looking at this computer screen or from going to the beach, can influence how you breathe. And the reason why I say this is very ambitious, because I think at first blush, many people would think that's kind of crazy. How can light affect how we breathe? And I want you all to think for a moment about um, being on a hotel room in the Caribbean, okay? And you're just about to step out on your balcony and see this beautiful, well-lit beach scene. This, I mean, lots of beautiful light coming in, and this, and the sand and the waves rolling in. And many of you in doing that will go, ah. It's actually an observed scientific fact that bright light will alter how you breathe. You will begin to take this deep breath. Light can also dramatically affect your mood. And to be fair, as I was telling you about the Caribbean, I was probably more affecting your mood than your breathing per se, right? Because I'm not actually changing light as you look through the computer screen. So there's a bunch of things going on here. But there is some really interesting interactions between how light can affect our breathing. And thus far, they have really been understudied. So our lab is starting to look at how light is affecting our breathing, either through our circadian clock or potentially independent of that. So a bunch of different pathways that that light could be taking, all by way of the brain. The other thing that we're really interested in is how obesity affects breathing. So I mentioned a little bit earlier that sleep apnea and obesity are two really interesting variables that interact with each other. So if one is overweight or obese, your chance of developing sleep apnea goes way, way up. So we're interested in determining, why is that? Right now, the traditional hypothesis would say that the reason why an individual develops sleep apnea because they're obese is because they have this excessive fat mass around their neck and around their airway, and that when they fall asleep and their muscles relax, that extra mechanical load of fat literally collapses their airway, and then they can't breathe. So our research would suggest that that is not the whole story. What we think is actually going on, as opposed to an individual with sleep apnea who's also obese, putting themselves in a situation where they can't breathe because of that obstruction, we think that the obese individual won't breathe. So obesity also causes dramatic changes to how our neurons, so how our brain cells talk to each other. And we think that some miscommunication within our brain region that controls how we breathe is now altered with obesity. And so we literally stop breathing because our brain fails to tell us to breathe. And if that's the case, that means we can target that circuitry and potentially develop a pharmaceutical or a pill that you can take to prevent that from happening, which would be amazing. So we're also pursuing that. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is that like all good things in science, there's never one answer. And the other thing that we're really interested in is how sleep apnea and sex interact. So in all of the discussions so far I've had about sleep apnea, I've told you already that it's highly associated with obesity, but it's also highly associated with being male. So if you are a man, you have a much, much higher likelihood of developing sleep apnea. Even if you take a man and a woman and they both weigh the same amount, they both have the same amount of fat mass, the man is more likely to have that sleep apnea. So why is that? Furthermore, after women reach menopause, those protective effects they had disappear. So what is it about the interactions between estrogen or the neurological pathways, which are fundamentally different between males and females, that are contributing to how we breathe as women and how that interaction could be changed as an obese woman or with or without estrogen? So lots of very interesting, very ambitious ideas on the horizon. And as you can see, they're all very cross-disciplinary. I think that that's the most satisfying field to be in, is when you're getting to play with a bunch of different things. So yeah, hopefully in another couple of years, you'll be seeing more publications from the Arble Lab and all of our amazing things.